So I call this Think Fast News Time, and this is a primer on Extemp. For the advanced stuff, talk to Kennedy or Mackenzie, somebody who's had people who have made the top 60 at nationals, right? Why Extemp matters, it's real life speaking practice. Most of the public speaking that is done in real life is closer to Extemp than oratory, info, or interp events. Think about collaborative groups, staff meetings, and of course, teaching. And the other thing I would say is that our society needs more thought-based speakers who don't have necessarily an agenda of some sort other than to learn, to share learning, and to engage in conversation. Extemp does meet academic standards for Indiana, both in English language arts and in social studies. And I would say that it's also a great event for debaters who suddenly run out of things to do at the end of January. I'd like to see more of them showing up in this event come February and March, right? There's a lot of cross-pollination that's involved. Extemp prep sharpens cross-ex skills, and delivery of Extemp speeches can also help those debaters speaking chops. God knows they need help with their speaking chops as somebody who coaches debate as well. So this is intended for new coaches. I guess I can skip over these next couple of slides rather quickly, but it's interesting to look into the rule book and actually see what it says about the event. So here's the written record as opposed to the oral interpretation, and some of the received wisdom that we have about the event as represented in this room. We know there's no time limit. Maximum is 7 minutes. Overtime shall be a detriment, but is not the only cause for ranking last, as Mr. Mackenzie often points out in our sectional meetings. Speakers draw 3 topics 30 minutes before speaking, different topic area used in each round. Contestants prepare their speech without consultation or discussion with anyone. And this little bit of the rule book was very interesting because I haven't seen anybody bring in news clippings for a long time. Of course, back in the day, we spent about half of our practices just going through and clipping, copying, Newsweek, Time, U.S. News and World Report. That was basically all that we had, right? Pre-internet. So the judging bit of this, I think, is very interesting, again, to look at the tournament manual, and if people were actually getting their judging criteria from the tournament manual, they would find some things that we don't often talk about. Strict adherence to precise statement of the topic. I have seen a lot of speeches in my time when kids play pretty fast and loose with the topic, and they'll guide it towards something that they'd rather talk about rather than what they're being asked in the question. Well-chosen information relative to the subject, I think that's gotten a lot more traction, particularly over the last 10 to 15 years. The amount of information that gets shoehorned into a 7-minute Extemp speech, pretty impressive sometimes, 10, 12 pieces of evidence from 10 or 12 different sources. Organization of the material according to some logical plan and effective delivery. So, talking about trends and how this gets judged, some of my students in the past have come to believe that unless they do include a certain number of sources, that they will not rank as well as those killer kids from Fishers who can get 10 pieces of evidence in there. But that is only one aspect of how we're supposed to be judging this. It's supposed to be an original synthesis of current fact and opinion on the designated topic. And of course, notes may not be used while speaking in front of the judge. So this is more along the lines of what I have garnered as a coach for the last 20 years. from some of you sitting here right now, but it also serves as a good way to help students get into the event. Did I learn anything from you in this speech? That's something I want to know. Did I learn anything? If you're prepared, oftentimes students know more about current events than many of our judges do. That I don't think is a surprise to anyone because of the amount of information that we have being tossed at us these days. So it's completely within the realm of possibilities that students who spend a lot of their spare time finding out more about United States trade policy would be better versed in that than a parent, a bus driver, or an English teacher for that matter. I also encourage students to talk with me. And of course, it's a one-sided conversation, but it should include some way for me to get in, me as a judge, to get into this conversation and not just hear you talk at me. So that's why over the last little period of time, probably the last 10 years at least, I've encouraged students to try to include a little bit more humor in their presentations. The self-deprecating stuff is easy enough to come by. The stereotypes are easy to come by. So I try to get students to expand beyond that, but especially in an election year, before an election, it's a dangerous game to try to play that humor up too much. So there's a line to be walked that a lot of kids don't quite get until they're juniors or seniors, because they just think they can spout off anything at all that they heard Trevor Noah say the night before and have it be okay. The second bullet point I have under that, don't be an authoritative jerk. In my teaching, I teach AP English language in part, and I always teach the matter of credibility as being a burden, but also a joy. So if you tried to tell me that you, 16-year-old kid, have learned so much more about this and you have a be-all and end-all kind of answer to the question that's being posed to you, I'm going to be less inclined to listen to you and to rank you well. I would like you to come across as a warm person. I would like you to come across as somebody that I can have a conversation with, if I so chose, as opposed to being a definitive know-it-all. And again, did you answer the question? That is directly from the rule book, but again, I think that's something that often gets underplayed, or at least played down in the way that we judge the event these days. So this is true for both debate and extemp. I think, again, there's a lot of crossover between these worlds. But the first thing that I always encourage my students to begin with is knowing stuff. Research is a vital part of preparation. Knowing stuff means not just researching and filing articles, but it means actually reading them, paying attention to the news, paying attention to a couple of different news sources, because I don't know about you, but my students find their comfort zones and they like to stay there, whether they get their news from Comedy Central or they get their news from MSNBC or Fox or NPR, the BBC. They have a tendency to want to find the places that make them feel comfortable, and pushing them out of that and looking at journalism as a whole is really important. And this is followed up with the discussion of what a reliable source actually is, and I'm going to share with you a slide that I'm pretty sure that everybody has seen before in terms of evaluating sources. There have been so many iterations of it, and it changes from year to year, but it's an important overall guide to the reliability of sources. Can't remember who I stole this from, but I often start with a conversation cafe with students, allowing student research on a given topic, and then they can share with one another and me the kinds of things that they've been learning, especially for novices, about topic areas, rather than just going directly into surface level discussion of something and giving me a 2-minute Extemp speech. It might be better for a student to actually spend some time reading and discussing the things that they've discovered in a particular topic area, especially when it comes to things like in domestic Extemp business and social policy, because oftentimes students are very ignorant, I can say that, very ignorant about the way that those things work in the world as a whole. They know a lot of political slogans, they know some stuff they got from Comedy Central, but they don't necessarily know very much about how the economy works. For example, they'll try to equate the stock market with the economy and assume that what's good for the stock market is good for the economy. And of course, those of us on the ground know that that's not exactly the case. You can find practice Extemp questions at Extemp Central. They've come back. I think they had gone away for about a year or two, but they've come back. And NFHS supplies questions, but I think those are in limited circulation, and they do have limits on the way that they are supposed to be circulated. They're not supposed to be just published. So acquiring those is a little bit of an iffier proposition. Extemp Central, God bless them, they do a great job of putting out weekly questions that also help students become aware of what is going on in the world, in the news, and can actually serve both as practice questions, but also as guides for research. Because students might not know what's been happening lately in Mali, for example, in international Extemp. They may not know about the refugee camp in Greece that's been burning for 3 days because there are a bunch of migrants who have been stuck there for years. So the Extemp questions themselves can help kids do research on stuff that they didn't even know existed. Right? Here's the media bias chart that I was referencing. This is a couple of years old by now. You can find this and versions of it, derivatives of it, online. But basically, it goes from left to right, which doesn't really need much explanation. But also from top to bottom, from fact reporting to complex analysis, mix of fact reporting and analysis, and so on. So this is also a helpful tool because it allows students to see that, yeah, sure, everybody has bias left to right, but there's also the matter of depth. There's also the matter of what is being offered. If we're just looking at facts, the Bloomberg ticker is great, AP is fine. Reuters, by the way, always teach your kids to say Reuters and not Reuters. Those are all great. But if we want to find out a little bit more, we got to go into some of these other sources and just acknowledge that Mother Jones and the Standard or the National Review are going to come at this from different perspectives, and that's okay. And that's a good thing. Filing systems. Again, we don't have to haul around those buckets anymore as once we did. The piles and piles of Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report. There are 3 different things that I have used in my coaching since we've gone online. Google Drive is the simplest and cheapest. It's free. One of the beautiful things about Google Drive is that you can copy some of your file system and recreate it for each year. You have archives that stay there. And you can use those for other kinds of research on the team, for Congress and debate of other sorts. Prepped, we used Prepped last year. I wonder has anybody else used Prepped?
Yeah, we have.
Okay. So I have mixed feelings about Prepped. It is really cool the way that it just gives you this torrent of information, absolute torrent, as when you update your files. The downside is it gives you a torrent of information when you update your files. And so students have often ended up wading through a bunch of straw to get any grain because of you can use the parameters that are there in Prepped, but it does seem to have that little issue.
I liked it better for Congress than Extemp, but we use them for both. Because Congress, I like the way you can download the docket, and then they can save for specific bills.
Yeah.
But you're right, with Extemp, there's a lot of stuff available, but it beats carrying tubs.
Yeah, it does. Prepped has also come down in price, so my remark here about it being a bit pricey is somewhat dated. I think that that's because they felt a little competition from the next one, which is Extemp Genie. I haven't priced Prepped this year because actually we went back to Extemp Genie ourselves this year. But Extemp Genie also has a search feature. It will download some things for you. The query file allows you to search within downloaded sources as well. And this also allows students with a toolbar extension to file very quickly to do fast catch. And you can combine filing with that other thing that I talked about, which is actually knowing stuff. So that's one of the things I like about Extemp Genie. It encourages students to do some of their own research and to hone their own research skills as well while they file. Some ideas on practice. Conversation is speech. I'd like to have students speak at every practice. Once upon a time, I had research days, and then I had speaking days, and I've tried to encourage kids to do some kind of speaking every time. So have a conversation about a headline. Have a conversation about a press conference, about a speech at a convention. Have a conversation. That is a kind of preparation. Discussion is also speech. So 2 or more team members share what they have learned in their research. Maybe you have a conservative kid and you have a liberal kid. Have them share what they found in their favorite sources about a particular topic. That could be a lot more interesting than you just explaining to them what liberal and conservative points of view are on a particular topic. I pretty much require that all extempers do impromptu, at least as a practice event. If they're not doing the old classic doubling of oratory and extemp in tournaments, I have everybody do impromptu as a tool for thinking on your feet. So this is also an entry level into doing full-blown extemp speeches, because students can come up with something to talk about in the expanded 7-minute flex prep thing of impromptu. This also encourages students, because I've had kids like this. I've had kids who have spent way more time in extemp prep reading sources, and the time gets away from them because they're inveterate readers, and before they know it, they've got 10 minutes left to outline a speech, rehearse it, and get down to the room. So impromptu works very well for getting kids off of that temptation and into the practice of outlining the speech and giving it from memory. This also allows them to incorporate the extemp dance as a mnemonic device. That's that little dance that we teach kids to do, where they move left to right, front to back. There are variations on it that you can choreograph yourself, but they allow students to remember where they are in a speech based on where they are in the dance. and anything that kids can have to hang their hat on in terms of memorization, I have found they're going to be happy with. So I can't see you guys, but you can see me, and that's what I don't like about this. So if somebody has something they want to jump in and add, go right ahead. I'm trying to pause and allow that to happen. Okay.
I can give you some hard numbers on US Extemp on what they're using at nationals in the outrounds.
Okay.
In the last 4 years, I've audited the semis, so I've had one section, not two. But I've seen 24 students, and 16 are filing with have filed with Extemp Genie, and that's on the rise. 7 filed with Prep, that's on the decline. And interestingly enough, I had one student that was using Google Drive, and I said, how do you keep up with these sources, these people that are using these services? And he said, and now he's a national circuit kid, he said, there are 8 of us that filed together from all over the United States. And
wow.
They all happen to be, all of them broke, he said. So they're like phenomenal kids, and it probably was the best filing system and depth of material and quality of analysis, quality of topics that I saw. But how many of us have that kind of connection?
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, Google Drive, it's free. And that's why he said they were doing it. He said, we're a little economically challenged in our program. We want to be good. And so that's how we do it.
Okay. Good to know. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Could I jump in on that note just for a second?
Sure.
For the Google Drive type, and so I put in the chat this debatetrade.com. This is a resource I've come across that I don't think has been very widely used in our circuit, but again, it allows that kind of national trading of resources, so that you may have access to something like Extemp Genie, but I know some of our kids just don't have the money to put into that, and our program doesn't have the money to put into it. And so whether you're doing Extemp or whether you're doing debate, it's a way to collect your files, but then exchange your files with other people's to then come up with a database. And it can be something that includes more of the kind of analysis and personalized organization that Michael's talking about. So that might be something that people would be interested in looking at.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Appreciate that, Candy. Let's see if I've got a little bit more. I was afraid this would happen. I know we have meetings at 4 o'clock, so basic Extemp outlines. No need to reinvent the wheel for speakers who are new to the event. Most of our kids, I mean, as an English teacher, I try to break them of this, but they already know the 5-paragraph essay. They already do. So go ahead and use your intro the way that kids have been taught since 3rd grade to use the 5-paragraph essay. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. That's fine. You go for it. Step 2 is that Extemp dance kind of thing that I talked about, where you're giving some background, you have an attention-getting device, a preview, and then you just go through the steps. And again, that's a physical mnemonic quality that I think does help out. And then when kids get really comfortable with that and they're really ready to step out and do their own thing, let them. Let the message define the format and be freed of that. Mr. Kennedy does a great thing with what we used to call unified analysis, I think, a lot more, and provides different entrees into outlines that students who are more advanced and who have better memory skills, I think, can more readily get into. So you might want to ask him about that. Okay, quickly before we run out of time here, team management and psychology. If you've got 2 extempers, you've got an Extemp squad. There is a certain amount of esprit de corps, a certain sense of dedication to one's fellows in this event, more than I think exists in some of the other speech events, because extempers are a bit of a rare breed, even if it is something that I think would help a lot of students if they learned how to do that. Make the team responsible. If you file, they will feel freed not to file. The departed, not dead, but moved on, Garrett Garver. How much filing had he done for you guys, Dave, back in the day when he was really working hard?
Almost all of it.
Almost all.
Yeah, he spent hours a week, not just reading, but just getting the material that he thought he needed. Our US Extemp files were phenomenal. Our IX files, yeah, not so much, because he didn't do it.
Yeah.
He did US.
And another little bit is to have team members write their own Extemp questions based on what they find in the news. That's really a level I'll admit I haven't been able to get to with very many people. But when they get to that level, it's really fascinating to see the kinds of questions that they come up with. And don't let them be satisfied. Novice blue ribbons are thick on the ground. Facility with the basics should not be mistaken for mastery of the event. So you learn the Extemp dance, you learn to memorize 2 sources per point. Congratulations! You know, you got first place at the tournament with 3 other competitors in it. So don't let them be satisfied with that. I think that's all I got. You know how to contact me.